Yeah, after two belongs to you. After two belongs to you. I like this. Talk for 2 minutes and get 10 free more value with GT&T.
It's time to say into you. Start talking 10 after 2.
Talk, 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 no limit.
2 for 10.
Get with it! GT&T brings more value to you. Talk for 2 minutes and enjoy 10 free. GT&T, best value in Guyana.
Program which looks at issues of interest to you. Welcome to tonight's program with Dr. Grantley Warren.
In part one of this two-part series on elections and elections commission, we spent some time trying to understand why in the very first place a commission which was intended to be a one-off operation for the 1997 elections is still with us in its current form and as it was devised then. It even survived the constitutional reform process. And as a group, we discussed ways of amending it to create what was then alluded to, this notion that we should have an independent commission. And in a real sense, the Jamaica model seems to be the one that was most favored, but then we recognized a number of things. If one were to very quickly itemize the discussion, there was general consensus about the point that there should be freedom from political direction for this commission, that the distrust in politicized polity as individuals and as groups, civil society groupings, etc., perhaps, and the smallness of the pool, as it were, as it was represented, of relatively independent persons from, or groupings from which we could draw people to superintend over the operations of this commission, is something to be looked at with a view perhaps to doing a couple of other things, and that we should perhaps start thinking. We should not rule out the possibility of engaging others who are qualified to do so from outside of ourselves, be they external Guyanese, external CARICOM persons, or even others further afield. At least, I thought I heard, for an interim period where we could get over some of this massive distrust which seems to pervade all of our discussions and the way in which we see our institutions operating. Then there was the call also for the fact that the Elections Commission should operate like all of the other commissions. They should be independent agencies, not remaining budget agencies of one ministry or other. In this particular case, the Office of the President. There was a call also for political parties to take some responsibility, instead of leaving it up to this institution, for the actual conduct of the elections, the run-up to and actually during the election process itself on election day, in particular as well, and that regional election officers, like so many others, should also not be subject of control or direction from the particular politically appointed or other officers external to the election process. Of course, we spent a fair amount of time dealing with the problem of the appointment of the chief elections officer. Now that seems to be a moot point, because since that, our last discussion, it seems as if GCOM in its infinite wisdom has decided to not rehire Mr. Gokul Buru to that position. However, in the discussion which entered at least the press and other places, one got the distinct impression from the revelations made there within those media was that all was not well with GCOM as an institution. And it was not just the elections officer, chief elections officer alone, and therefore one should cast a glance at the effectiveness and efficiency of GCOM as an institution. Now, I tell you, that is where we will start this part 2 of this subject on elections and elections commission. And so my very first question to you gentlemen would be, there is this sense that GCOM, if it hadn't been for one academic being on that board at GCOM, the commissioners were passive people sitting there being brought the sum total of a major process by a chief elections officer, and then one hears about all of these other stories about how ineffective commissioners were in treating with this chief elections officer, or rather the other way around, how the chief elections officer seemed not to have recognized the place of the commissioners within this entire scheme of things. The flip side of that says some other things. Gentlemen, is, from what we have seen thus far and heard, is it time once again to re-engage or relook of GCOM, the way it's structured, the way it operates, its efficiency, style, motivations that we should be giving it, targets, etc.? Who wants to start?
Frankly, I think that the cast net has to be cast much wider, and in doing so, GCOM will not be excluded. I think there is, in fact, a problem with governance in the country, and a problem with governance in most of the institutions that are state institutions. You seem, in your reference, to have come to the conclusion that there are some commissions that are properly run. I would say that if one were to take a close look at most commissions, though the issues which they deal with are not as critical in some regards as the issue which GCOM deals with, to a large extent they all are faced with problems of governance. I don't know that there is any of our commissions that has had its umbilical cord cut from the government. The Parliament did attempt in a motion to do that, but the governing party and the President has not acquiesced, and so the motion has not been taken any further in terms of concrete action. So that most of these commissions are still, to a very large extent, political in their composition, controlled by the government, and will continue to be controlled by the government once they have to go to a ministry for their financing, as is the case with GCOM. And so I think that even in terms of GCOM, one of the earlier things that's required is to ensure that it has the fiscal independence to get on with its work, so that one does not have to depend on the government and the office of the President for releases of funds. What I found very interesting during the period of the presidency of Mr. Jack Dio was that he, at one time, came public in terms of his criticism of GCOM and their financial management. So the President came public on this matter. And so one would come to the conclusion that, you know, the issues of GCOM are not issues that are not unknown in all quarters. One may also recall that the Public Accounts Committee also came up with issues in relation to GCOM. So the issues are out there. And what is required, again, is the political will. and in some regards, a political culture that would allow for us to deal with GCOM. And I want to make one reference to show that we don't have the will. GCOM is not the only institution that was slated for change, and there's been no effort to bring about that change. We may recall that the electoral system itself was cast for the 2001 elections with a commitment that immediately after those elections we would go back to the drawing board to make sure we put a proper constituency and top-up system in place. And we haven't had the will to do that, so the electoral system too has remained as it was, although we had publicly declared we wanted to change it. So I think my argument that the net has to be cast much broader has to do with the whole question of the way in which we are not committed to good governance, the way in which our political culture is still one, where we don't recognize there is a role for non-partisan agencies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I want to completely endorse Vincent's sentiments and views, because I think that's where the problem lies, in the larger framework in which we operate politically and otherwise in this country, and that one has to be realistic. If you're in government, and as a result of being in government, you then have some leverage and some control, a la the financial and control of GCOM not being independent from the government. And so you're not going to want to give that up, all right? And one has to be realistic. It seems to me, therefore, that the political will has to come from those who are in opposition, especially an opposition that now has some institutional power, and I say power in quotes because it's not really power, but they do have some institutional leverage, if you will. And I think the will at this juncture in our history to change GCOM and to change these other vexatious institutions and so forth, that will, I think, primarily has to now come from the opposition. And I think that, certainly for me, that 2011 and the results of those elections was an opening, that those results are really, it's an opening to deal with some of these questions, so that GCOM and all these other institutions, all these commissions that are supposed to be independent but are not being governed in an independent way, largely because the government doesn't want to. Right? Now, the opposition, it seems to me, has to differentiate itself from the government and has to stand up and say, once and for all, that these institutions, the whole question of governance, has to be changed, and we are putting this on the table. And insofar as you have a parliamentary majority, that one of the things you want to do is to use that as a leverage to bring about these fundamental changes, not cosmetic changes, not reform, fundamental changes to these commissions. And GCOM is very important because elections here in Guyana are about life and death. Right? And if we don't get that right, then it doesn't seem to me that we'll get other things right. But my call at this point is on the opposition to show the political will that it wants to bring about some fundamental change in the process.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with them on everything, except I'm not so sure what they're calling political will. But when I'm through with what I think and they see as political will, we will be in total agreement. I think one has to recognize that every achievement since 1992 came as a result of political protest and pressure. As a result of the 1997 protest, we had constitutional reform and some changes occurred. Protest in 2001 also brought some changes. Linden is a clear manifestation of only protests giving you the changes you want. Why is this so? I think this is so because while the government talks about democracy, it has no interest in democracy. The government, for me, if you're going to develop a democratic society, you have to be involved in shifting power away from the state to the people. It's going to be on a continuum going in that direction. The government is going in the other direction. They're seeking to shift power away from the people to the state. That became, it touched its epitome on the Jack Deo, who I believe has been the most ridiculous, pompous, and disrespectful president this country has ever seen. Because he clearly taught that he can do as he like, whenever he like, however he like, wherever he like. That coincided with the time when the PNC was involved with constructive engagement, where the party decided at the time the best thing to do, and I'm not here blaming the leadership of the party at the time. I thought people felt that, well, there was a lot of protests, etc., and give the government a chance, let us engage them, etc., but they never deliver. We engaged, but it wasn't constructive. What happened as a result of that engagement? As a result of that engagement, Jack Deo emasculated the society, those in the opposition and even some in his own political party. And so what that tells me is that you're not going to get anything out of the government unless you are organized, mobilized, and you have the capacity to put pressure on the government and stop them from doing as they like. Now, we come to this era in which the government is a minority and the opposition has a majority, and the government still tries to exercise the Jack Deoan pomposity by deciding every time the opposition makes a decision, it's not a good decision for the country. The truth of the matter, I sat in parliament with government. Clement Roy was famous for getting up and saying the people decided. The people give us the mandate. I've heard Ashni Singh say the people give us the mandate when they had 51%. Now that they don't have 51%, they don't see the people as giving the mandate to the opposition. But the reality is the people give the mandate to the opposition. Here's where I agree with two of them. The opposition must now take that mandate and bring pressure to bear to the government with a clear philosophical position in mind, that we are decreasing the power of the state, putting the people of this country in charge, and doing as much as we could to develop a democratic society. If we do it in that context, and here's where I agree with Vincent, then we will catch the entire society, and the election commission will be a mere subset of the whole change that we seek.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think basically I see full agreement on the idea that political will, which will inform strategy from time to time, and that is basically you have identified a specific set of strategies which will achieve what is desirable. But I suspect I see here unanimity of position on the whole notion that this political will is what will guide that, and the strategies will flow out of one's reading of the situation at that moment.
And
from
if
time
I
to
could
time.
just intervene here, because Arby raised the question as to what do we mean by political will, something I referred to. And I sense that from the little discourse we've had so far, that we could now make a differentiation between political will and political commitment. And I think the point that Arby made, which puts him apart from what he thought we were saying, was that there's no commitment on the part of the government to change. And so, in a sense, in line with what David said, the political will has to exist in the opposition as the change agents. And I think that in that regard, one would have to pose the question as to whether in fact the opposition is really completely in tune with the required commitment. And if they're in tune with that commitment, shouldn't there be an approach separate and apart from the piecemeal things that are done in Parliament? Because what Parliament essentially does is the government's agenda and its piecemeal stuff. Shouldn't they have a program that seeks to focus on the required change and to use both the Parliament and extra parliamentary activities in pursuit of that program? I'm not quite sure we can give them a A, a B, and even a C in that regard.
All right.
Vincent made a critical point, but I want to add to what Vincent is saying. The failure of the opposition to do education. A classical case is the budget. Until now, we have not explained to people that this government, that when you are running a proper government, that you prepare a project profile for every project, and that you can go to the budget and see the details of the project and you know from this project profile what is intended. What has this government done? This government puts a lump sum money with no project profile. We had a classic case in Parliament where they came saying they wanted, I think it was $4 million for a road. And Irfan Ali got up and was going on. So Mr. Corbyn and I started to question him on this road. It turned out that the road he was talking about is the street that Robert Corbyn and I grew up in. It's not a street, it's an alley called Stewart Path. And he was going on about it. He had no project profile. And therefore it was evident to me that even if you build it 10 feet high, this little alleyway between two fences could not cost the money that he was calling. And so we need to educate people to understand the importance of project profile, and that to the extent that the government isn't preparing proper project profile, they shouldn't approve money. Amelia Falls is one case in question where there is no proper project profile and you come in for money, and I think the opposition is right to say no, but the opposition needs to go a little further and to educate people on the basics of their demands.
Granty, before you go off, I just couldn't let Vincent think, and I gave grade once and got into a lot of trouble. And I noticed Vincent didn't give a grade. He said what grade should not be given. but I think what we are in the presence of is an opposition that has been given an opening, one can call it a mandate, to really do some big things. And it has shown no vision to do big things. So, in fairness to the opposition, they've done things. A little thing here, I always like to say they do a wonderful job of checking the government. But if your check doesn't lead to balance, you're really not doing business. And if you're going to lead to balance, then you have to have a vision. What is your vision? Is your vision that this society is in crisis? And the way that we're going to get past this crisis is that we have got to have a complete overhaul of the process, overall of the system. We've got to introduce a new political praxis, a new political culture, a new way of governance. And if you say that, then that should inform your vision. And that in turn would say, look, the big thing that we've got to deal with is the question of governance. The big thing that we've got to deal with is the question of economic management. And if you talk about those big things and you try to go after those big things, then you lay the groundwork for GCOM and all these other commissions and so forth to be reformed. But I think, and here is where I agree with Aubrey, I think that we have an opposition that itself, and this is normal in societies that have gone down as low as we have gotten, that all of us, are part of this society, and in a sense become consumed by the malaise. And you look at an opposition and you say, where are these people living? What are they hearing? Who are they talking to? So I think the opposition itself has been caught, Aubrey, in that thing that Jack Dio has been able to get away with. So the Jack Dio approach has become the norm, and the opposition finds itself operating in that norm. I mean, you did not have a majority, and you went into constructive dialogue, and you got nothing. Now you have a majority. Why are you going back into constructive dialogue? That the constructive dialogue has to be a dialogue with people. Look, if this government doesn't want to involve people in dealing and discussing the issues of the country, of talking about GCOM, of educating the people, that's the opposition job. We really should be having, if you will here, a parallel government in this country. And that if the opposition is serious, that's what it will begin to do, to see itself as a parallel government and begin to do the things that the government are not doing. So you're talking about corruption? If the government doesn't want to investigate corruption, the opposition should set up its own commission. And there's nothing stopping the parliament, you're parliamentarian, both of you are, there's nothing stopping the parliament from setting up a parliamentary committee to investigate corruption in this country. So it's will, but that will has to come from a vision as to where we want to go.
All right, very good. I'll tell you what, to sort in this first segment, to close off our immediate inquiry into the GCOM phenomena, I wonder if we have impending elections, and this is by way of introduction of the substantive issue for this evening's spotlight, and that is local government elections. We have all been looking for local government elections since '94, and the prospect was held that we could conceivably have it in 2013. The most immediate question, therefore, in view of all that our examination has exposed in relation to this particular commission, the Elections Commission, its deficiencies, its failures, areas that need to be remedied, whether we should be going into a 2013 or 2014, which is now, look, anyway, I wouldn't prejudice that, 2013 with this particular commission unchanged, superintending over the elections, this local government election, which we deem to be so important.
I think that the local government election poses challenges to GCOM and the manner of its conduct of affairs, which could redound to the benefit of GCOM's institutional development. The elections which are due are in fact elections insofar as you're talking about 71 separate elections. It's not one election. It's 71 separate elections. 65 neighborhood democratic councils and 6 municipalities. But that is not all that's different. You're talking about an electoral system that is going to allow for individuals and groups other than political parties to participate. And so I think that the very atmosphere, the environment that these elections can create could be a catalyst to change, because you're not going to be able to campaign purely on ethnic grounds. You're not going to be able to campaign purely on party grounds, because you're going to find individuals of different ethnicity joining in the same group. You're going to find individuals who at a national election may support a particular party, not necessarily supporting that party in the local government elections, and they may well go after individual candidates they want to support or groups. So I think that while one may say internally GCOM has its problems, I think that the external dynamics that these elections can provide can in fact challenge GCOM in some regards to come different, but more than challenge GCOM, can create a national environment that starts to see an evolution in the way we conduct political affairs.
Who will take a very quick shot, and then we'll go to break, and the third person will pick it up immediately after the break.
Well, I think I agree with Vincent in large measure, but I would like to look at it from another standpoint. The standpoint I'd like to look at it from is why they don't want local government elections. They don't want local government election, and this is the government, because of a number of things. One, for the first time in all constituencies, individuals can challenge. And therefore, you might have somebody in a community who is better than the PPP appointed person, and that person is likely to win.
And the person might be PPP.
And the person might be PPP but wants to run independent. So they will see that as diminishing their control. Because one thing I always remember Kem Rajaratnam saying about the PPP is that they're control freaks, and it breaks the control. The second thing I think they're afraid of is that if the local government election comes in the context of reform, you will have objective criteria for allocation of resources to the various NDCs. That will now remove from the government the situation where, first of all, they have a set of appointed groups now, which they're directing, and they can give who they want money when they like. That will remove that. You will now have to use objective criteria and allocate money. That reduces the government's control and the avenues for corruption that they so like. So that local government, to me, poses a challenge for the PPP because it hits at the power base. The fact that they like to dominate and to control, and local government will shift power away from them to the people. And that, I think, they're worried about. The other fundamental thing about local government that they should pay careful attention to is this: that it also, if you have a proper local government system, you will have a lot of people coming into the system, and it will become a training ground for new people in politics to emerge at the national level. And with the level of incompetence you have at the national level, I mean, what the things that are happening in the health ministry, it's only Guyana he is not fired. So it will bring new people, and the incompetence of those at the top will show. And I believe for those and some other reasons, they don't want local government elections.
I'll tell you what, we are going to take a short break, but and you'll be given the floor, David. And as you do so, I would like for you to try and pull this element about whether, in fact, we should be contemplating having this GCOM in its unmodified form superintend over the elections whenever, if and whenever they do occur. We'll go to break at this time. Over.
Yeah, after two belongs to you. After two belongs to you. I like this. Talk for 2 minutes and get 10 free more value with GT&T.
It's time to say it to you. Start talking 10 after 2.
Talk, 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 no limit, 2 for 10. Get with it! GT&T brings more value to you. Talk for 2 minutes and enjoy 10 free. GT&T, best value in Guyana.
Yes, David, you're on.
Well, you know, Granty, ideally you would say, well, let's have a new commission, let's reform the commission, and so forth. But let's be realistic that that's not going to happen today or tomorrow or before the local government election. So ideally, yes, it would make sense for us to have a reform commission and so forth. But I want to say, I would take a chance and go to the elections with this commission, because I think what Vincent did really has caused the country to really now begin to look at GCOM. GCOM is now under the spotlight in a way that it has not been in between elections. It comes under the spotlight during election time. All right? I think what Vincent has done is show that you can have a partisan nominee who functions in an objective manner. All right? And I think that if we put enough pressure on the commissioners that are there, we can have what I would call the Alexander model. Pull a lot of that out of them. I'm saying that whoever takes Gokul Budu's position will be under tremendous pressure not to be barefacedly and pompously, to use Aubrey Storm, operate in the way that he has done. So I think this commission, right, can oversee the election because of the spotlight on it, because of what Alexander did, and so forth. The country, see, when the country is looking, there is less opportunity to be as barefaced as you normally would. And I want to associate myself with the comments here that in relation to local government election, there are two things for me that are important. One is to devolve power in a meaningful way to the regions and the municipalities and the neighborhood councils and so forth. And I hope the legislations that are pending will take away some of that power from the minister, because that's crucial. You can have all the local government elections, you can have all the independent people in place, but if the central government continues to have that kind of uninhibited power to tell local officers what to do, to ignore their budgets and impose their budget, then we're not doing business. So for me, electoral reform is important. Secondly, that, and I do agree that when people run as independents in their communities, it shifts that control away from the government. But I have to say that it also shifts control again from the opposition parties. All right, and I think that's really key to get back to a local government system where parties, whether they're opposition or the government parties, do not have control over what's going on in the local environment. So, in a nutshell, I would go with this commission because I am pretty certain that this commission now cannot behave as the commission of yesterday.
All right. Vincent, in particular, this leads directly into one of the things I hope that you will do for us tonight. There has been much talk about these 4 bills which were conditions precedent to the holding of these local government elections. And some have almost started to become mystified in a sort. Some people have become mystified with all of the talk that's been going on. Could you tell us in a nutshell what these 4 bills are and what it is they hoped to achieve? And then we will come into context to see who should be afraid of what and for what reasons.
And before I do that, I just want to make one point that follows on from what David said. I think that if we have local government elections that throw up the kind of mix of people, individuals, groups, and the parties, that the local government in Guyana could become a movement in itself. Yeah. For change. I think these bodies could see commonalities of interest and represent a challenge to the way in which things are done in the country. So I think that there's a great possibility of a bottom-up movement coming through the kind of local government that the elections can throw up for us. The reform was essentially intended to bring into being the provisions of the Constitution, which is largely focused around the question of autonomy and giving more power to the people. That is where it is really focused. And the first aspect of that is indeed the electoral system. Let me say, generally speaking, the reform has not achieved all that could have been, or even all that was intended. But the electoral system, for example, gives an opportunity for a wider involvement of people who are not necessarily driven by party politics. I think that is important. So the electoral system can give us bodies of people that are really grounded in their communities rather than looking towards a party for direction. You know, I had done some work in the local government system as it is, and I made the point in the work that I did that notwithstanding all of the rhetoric in the white paper and all of that, that the way in which the electoral system was constructed, it still allowed for the party leader to influence and determine what will happen right down to the level of the Neighborhood Democratic Council. And this electoral system has the potential to destroy that. And I think that one must always look at the experiences to see the potential. The 1994 elections, local government elections, led to some councils in places like Craig, Caledonia, Firish, Gibraltar, and some other places that could not be identified with a particular party and showed the potential that local government has. That they haven't worked is another question. But those elections showed us where the potential is. And therefore, I think that we talked earlier about political will and commitment. I think the parties are challenged now to demonstrate their own political commitment and will for true good governance to emerge in the way in which they deal with these elections, whether they want to jump in as parties or whether they want to step back and to allow the people to determine what happens at the local level. The parties are challenged.
All right.
But
now,
no, there's, oh, I thought it was true.
the another important aspect of the reform is the local government commission.
Good.
It is important.
Which is subject of one specific act, one of
Yes.
these bills.
Yes,
That is,
subject of one of the bills. So
yes.
elections is one bill, the commission is another bill.
Yes.
What does that bill seek to do? It seeks to put in place not the local government service commission that is presently provided for in the Municipal and District Councils Act. The one in the Municipal and District Councils Act primarily speaks about how you could deal with an independent commission in relation to staffing of local authorities. The commission that we are talking about now goes beyond staffing, but includes staffing, which is also critical. So what you are seeking to do is to take, in the first instance, staffing of the senior staff out of the hands of a ministry and a minister, and to allow a commission to deal with that issue of staffing. And in fact, the vision is to make local government a profession, a career path. If you deal with local government and you have somebody in the Neighborhood Democratic Council, and the most that person could be is an overseer, and there's no possibility of a career development, then you're not going to get the best people. So the commission is intended to give an aura of professionalism and a profession and a career possibility in local government. But beyond that, it's also intended to be the body that becomes an arbiter where there are problems in local government, be it an arbiter where there are internal problems in local authorities, or where there are problems between levels of government, be it the neighborhood council, the regional council, and things like that. And I should stop here to mention that the electoral system should also provide for a lower tier being represented on a higher tier. So when a region is discussing regional matters, which obviously affect local people, then the local people are there to have an input as well. Then we come to the fiscal transfers. I think it's the one in which we have achieved probably the least. And why I say that is this. We know we're going to have a formula that's going to speak to fiscal transfers, and therefore how much is allocated from the allotment will be determined by the formula. But the allotment itself will still be determined by the central government. And we need to move to a system that allows for even the allotment being objectively determined. And here is where I advocate for a system that allows for a complete reform in the way in which the functions of the state are allocated. We need to go to a system where we do some work to determine what is best done at which level. And based on that, to devolve those functions to the levels that can best do it. And having devolved those functions, then to match the functions with resources. There is this myth that said that local governments go begging central governments for money. Everywhere in the world, central governments, which are the greatest collectors of the people's taxes, have a responsibility to pass money on to local government to carry out its functions. Because the local government is not the greatest collector of taxes. But the things that are being done in the local area require resources that are sometimes collected by the central government. So, for example, in Guyana, you have an environmental tax collected by the central government. There's no relationship between that tax and environmental and sanitation work in the local areas. A kind of coverall provision is another bill that seeks to then deal with how do you remove powers that previously resided in the central ministry to allow for these powers to be exercised locally. And that's the bill that lends support to the fundamental change we're looking for, which is really to provide greater autonomy at the local levels. But there is work to be done, but I feel personally that the electoral system provides for a movement that can then challenge the status quo to ensure that we move in the direction of greater autonomy.
Yes.
I wanted to make the point too that if you look at the new local government system, it will solve some of the problems we have at the level of parliament, at the lower level. At the level of parliament, you have a situation where the government doesn't believe it must negotiate. Well, in the new local government system, if independents are elected, political parties are elected, an organization, for you to arrive at the head of it, you have to negotiate. Because the independents on behalf of the constituency, the political party can be half. So none of them will have enough to determine, so that you will have to negotiate. So I believe local government, as it is intended, can contribute to the development of a democratic culture. Because we have a history of central government believing that they must do it as they like, however they like, on their own. Local government now brings an approach which says, none of us will have the majority, let us negotiate and find a solution. And I believe that is a positive of the local government that we need to look at. I also believe that it has to be extended much more. If you look at the vehicles that pass through Linden, loaded with timber, destroying the roads, destroying everything in the wake, killing people on the highway as they park every night. I coming down the other night and they park. Now, nothing goes to the region from that. And local government should be structured in such a way that resources coming from a region should go back to the region to help develop the region. As it stands, all the resources come to the center. I said a while back we have a kleptocracy and a lot of kleptomaniacs. And so when it comes to the center, the kleptocracy thrives.
Wanted to make a contribution?
Well,
there,
quickly,
yes?
I do think that and I like Vincent's thing about the election becoming a movement, because I think that's so essential. And I do think that when we talk about shared governance and power sharing at the national level, that at the local level we can encourage that. And I think that if we encourage that kind of power sharing, what you call negotiation and so forth at the local level, these local government elections could well turn out to be the turning point for the kind of political solution that we've been yearning for now for decades. But we've got to make sure that those legislations bring about some kind of fundamental change whereby the central government is really relieved of some of those powers.
Yeah.
Control.
Now, Aubrey started on a discourse centered on why certain elements of these bills may be causing some people some problems. In particular, he focused on the government. And so I wondered if we could very quickly identify, almost point by point, what may be the contentious issues which are associated with any of these four bills: fiscal transfer commission, the amendments to the relevant act, and the District and Municipal Act. What it is that is so contentious. If you could just strip it to its barest.
But I wouldn't, but I don't know if I want to say contentious, but certainly the Local Government Commission is going to remove a lot of the power that the Minister Presidency exercise and his points of intervention into local affairs, and is going to give the councils more control over the conduct of their affairs, because overseers and town clerks in particular would not be able to sidestep the council in the name of some minister who has power.
And that's one area that is causing some problem
that's a very
for
important area.
the government.
And one of the issues that the debate will throw up is that because of the parliamentary majority, the government has not had its complete way in terms of the composition. I think they wanted to have as many people appointed by the president on those commissions to make them dummies like the other commissions are. And here is an opportunity now that we're going to have a commission that more likely is going to be an independent commission. So it's another area of leadership that will come from local government, where the commission is likely to be one that will not be under the thumb of the president. And that's a critical area.
Lenin had a classical case. When the local government system came into place after the 1980 elections, an order was made, a regulation was made, which said essentially this, that the region has responsibility for the lower bodies. When Kwakwani, as an NDC, rejected the government attempted an IMC, and the Region 10, were going to oversee the elections in Kwakwani, Minister Ganga decided and sent out a letter saying he revoked the powers of the region and he re-centralized the power to himself to prevent that. Is that level of idiocy that affects the system? It is that attempt to dominate and control power that they see as the greatest challenge.
No, we have answered the question why local democracy. At least you've had some statements that shed some light in that area. In view of the shenanigans which have now been displayed in the Parliament, the National Assembly, over the last couple of days, do you hold any hope of any local government elections in 2013? And if so, how do you see the current things being resolved?
I would put it this way. I think that GCOM has budgeted for, and if called upon, will seek to conduct those elections in 2013. So GCOM cannot be the fall guy here. I think GCOM will seek to conduct those elections. I am not convinced that all of the parties have an interest in those elections, but I think that the international community has stepped in on this one, and that's another dynamic that we have to look at carefully in the determination as to whether you have these elections or not. I think if we don't have them, we're going to have some fallout, and I don't think we have reason why we can't have them. So the government is challenged here. It's really challenged here on the question of whether to have or not to have local government elections.
Well, the next contribution should probably take notice of a note coming out from some sources in GCOM that says that they need at least 6 months to prepare for local government elections. But that clearly not December 2030.
Look, simple and straightforward. What the PPP is doing is playing the same old-time politics that they play. They decided they don't want local government election, and they try to link other things to it with the aim of saying there's no local government election because they refuse to do that. The opposition should point out to this country that it is childish, demand local government election, and actually pass a motion calling for local government election and throw the ball back in the PPP's court. The PPP is just playing a stupid political game. The opposition must not allow them to get away with it.
Let me go one step forward and say if the opposition wants local government election, the opposition can get local government election. The opposition has the capacity to make local government elections happen because their constituents are itching to take action against this government. Again, it comes back to our original thing about commitment and will, that if there is a commitment on the part of the opposition and there's a will for them to want local government elections, they can get local government elections. They have a majority in parliament and they have a constituency that feel that they have been left out of this system, even though they've given their votes to the majority.
One last point. If they want election as well, they can start a crusade against all the IMCs. I am willing to lead the one in Plaisance to get rid of the IMC in Plaisance, because since they took over, they're picking up garbage in Plaisance whenever they like. But the point is, if the opposition wants, it can move around this country and organize, and the people on the ground will move against those IMC and change it, as Kokwani has shown. And I know many areas that once you're willing to do the work, but we also have to accept that members of parliament have got to be prepared to go out there and work and believe parliament doesn't end in parliament.
Mm-hmm. Vincent, you'll have the very last word on this question.
Well, I want to come back. I don't know the 6-month plan. I think the GCOM can wrap it up in less than 6 months. And it's a question of a timely request being made of GCOM to prepare for those elections.
Those will be the last words on this issue of Spotlight, where we looked at the question of elections and elections commission. This was part 2 of that that subject. Clearly, we are indebted to Mr. Vincent Alexander, Dr. David Hines, and Mr. Aubrey Norton for sharing their time and expertise on an area that is quite critical, an area that I think we have recognized as areas that require immediate next steps. And if we have therefore over these 2 sessions informed you a little bit more about what it is that we should be expecting, the things that we should be looking for, then this program would have done what it intended, and that is essentially to educate, to allow us to act out our positions as citizens of this country. I therefore thank you, gentlemen, for participating in the series, and say good night to you from Spotlight.
Yeah, after 2 belongs to you. After 2 belongs to you. I like this. Talk for 2 minutes and get 10 free more value with GT&T.
It's time to stay into you. Start talking 10 after 2.
Talk, 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 no limit.
2 for 10.
Get with it! GT&T brings more value to you. Talk for 2 minutes and enjoy 10 free. GT&T, best value in Guyana.